This is another episode of Stand-Up Comedy, your host and MC, celebrating 40-plus years on the fringe of show business. Stories, interviews, and comedy sets from the famous and not so famous. Here's your host and MC, Scott Edwards.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the podcast. We got another great, fun interview of somebody that's been in the stand-up comedy industry for many years. He's moved on and does a whole nother job now with it entails dealing with kids in high school. We'll have to hear all about that. But ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome to the show the one and only Ian Williams.
Thank you. Thank you. Please hold your applause till the end.
Ian, thanks for being on the show, man.
Not a problem. I'm happy to be here. Great.
Well, I've done some research, and you did a lot of comedy back in the day. Why don't we share with the audience, what age were you? How'd you kind of get started in stand-up?
Sure. I was 24. I was a grad student at the University of Illinois. I'd always wanted to do stand-up. Going back to the stand-up I saw on The Tonight Show, probably, and all the influence of that. But at 24, I finally went on a stage. There was a club in a restaurant in Champaign, Illinois, that tried to do it, and I auditioned for them at like 1 p.m. to the manager and the assistant manager. That was
the perfect circumstance.
Yeah, and it's like no one really knew how to do this. Like I found out later that it's good to have a crowd when you audition. But this was like new to all of us kind of thing. So they're like, well, what do you got? And I'm like, well, okay. And no, very few people.
What year was that?
It was 84.
Yeah, that was right in the beginnings of stand-up comedy really starting to take off. And I can't imagine that Illinois was right on the cutting edge of entertainment.
Well, I was Chicago, and certainly Chicago. I was like 150 miles from Chicago in Champaign, Illinois. But Chicago was noted for that. If you want to do this L.A., New York, and then Second City, Chicago thing, if you want to play that game,
right.
I'll leave right now because I'm very sensitive. No, but it is obviously Second City was there. It really was a great environment. And it was a very friendly environment, very supportive. And when I came out here, I came out to San Francisco 10 years later or so, it was a little more protective, understandably. But, getting up in certain clubs was, you weren't necessarily welcome because you represented someone who wanted to take stage time from someone else. And it was more important, it was just meant more, I think, in San Francisco than Chicago.
Yeah, and I think that you're absolutely correct, though, that in the early 80s, there was a lot stronger support group between the entertainers because it was also new and everybody was trying to find their footing. I think when it got into the 90s and in the 2000s, it became a little bit more cutthroat and a little less supportive. But I think the 80s, which I always think of as the golden age of stand-up, at least for the clubs, there was a real camaraderie between the comics. Territory made a difference to some people. Obviously, the New York comics felt differently than the San Francisco comics versus the LA comics. But still, there was a little bit more openness, and it sounds like that's when you got started. That open mic you did when you were 24, did you get the gig?
Yeah, I did.
You must have had some good jokes for those guys.
Well, it seemed to work out. I do remember one being very racist by any standard. It was about Asian students who rode bikes in Champaign. That was and it was a pretty big group, and so. I certainly don't do that anymore. That was one of my first jokes. And it's one of
Wait a minute, Ian. Wait a minute. Are you saying that your material today is different than 1984?
Actually, it isn't, and I'm proud to say that I don't. When something works,
you stick with it, right?
Yeah.
There's no reason to grow or push the envelope. Just stick with it.
But, George Burns, I think he did the same act before the television for like 30 years. So I've always admired him. Obviously, but if I'd rather not talk about how some of that material could be heard still from maybe not 84, 85 probably. Anyway,
Well, so it sounded like a very auspicious start. Did you end up, working pretty regularly, making some income and doing some road work back in the day?
yeah, I did. I mean, I was full time for 11 years, and I was a grad student, and I actually did my thesis on stand up. I mean, it was it wasn't a doctoral thesis, but I did a really extended piece of writing on the state of stand up at that time, and I interviewed the Tribune. There's a guy named Larry Cart, who I would say to this day was one of the experts, and he was just a guy who reviewed music and entertainment, but he really knew comedy. And you could go back if you wanted to and read like his review of Kip Addotta or Larry Miller or anyone who showed up at Zanies in Chicago, and he would. I learned so much from his reviews and everything, and so I interviewed a lot of people and a lot of comics, and I got a very good grade on it, and blah blah blah. So I mean, and then I went up to Chicago, but I did do okay at the beginning, especially by today's standards. I guess I mean I don't even know what someone gets paid at like the Punchline now, but in those days I would. The thing was, if you were an opener, if you went on the road, you get generally like $250 a week. That would get you into Michigan from Chicago. You go up into Michigan, or you get a little money. There were two guys, Tom Sobel, and Mr. Yoder. I can't believe I'm forgetting his first name. I don't know if you know these names. They were just pretty prominent bookers for restaurants and things, one-nighters and all that in the Midwest at that time.
Well, it sounds like that after you did your dissertation and learned more about stand-up comedy through research and writing a paper, that you actually hit the boards, started working some road gigs, and made a little bit of 11 years, that's a good run for anybody. Did you make it to headliner status?
Yeah, I did. The one night is not at like Zanies in Chicago, no. And it was fun, when you go out on the road, you're doing a one nighter or something. So, but I was a very strong middle. I did there was a club in Winnipeg, I think it was called Rumors, and it was very famous because you had to do an hour there, and they would just bring one headliner up. I worked there for 1 week. I did an hour as a headliner. Survived, but that was kind of like a reevaluation of whether I can do it. And headlining is a weird thing. It really is more of a state of mind than material. Material doesn't hurt at all, but it is also a confidence, kind of an attitude, or really just a confidence. And if you don't have it, and when I went to Winnipeg, I felt like I was shooting myself in the foot from time to time, because I was following a guy who was very local and very dirty. And
that's always difficult. But when you force yourself to do more time, now I don't know what you did exactly, but what I as a producer would tell people, in my experience with other people in that situation, is you have to learn to work the audience, and you have to be able to engage with the audience and go back and forth, and you can fill time by just talking to the audience and engaging with them, and then fitting in your material when it worked, and that will help take a 45 minute set easily to an hour. Was that something you tried?
Yeah, no, I was pretty comfortable with that. Yeah, that wasn't something I necessarily relied on. For the most part, I was a 30-minute middle guy, and but for 45 I could do. But like this case in Winnipeg, they wanted an hour, and an hour was this thing where it gets in your head, because you're like, you have to cover that much. And even with crowd work, I just wasn't comfortable. I did fine. I got paid, life went on. It was just one of those things of like thinking to myself when they, headlining and all that. And I had TV credits. I won a whole episode of Star Search.
Hey, that's awesome.
Yeah. And lost to Kevin James.
Yeah, he's a nobody.
Yeah. And, I could have been better friends with him. He was the nicest guy in the world. And he gave me like radio phone numbers. Give this guy a call. And I'm like, I'm going out to California. You can have it was in Florida. at the time. I mean, I didn't pursue it, and who knows? But every comic has 1,000 of those woulda, shoulda things, and he did very well. I knew he was going to do well as soon as I saw him. And the funny thing is on Star Search, I'm kind of all over the place here, but the first show I won was at 9:30 at night, and it's at the theater, the TV studio theater at Universal Studios. And I defeated a woman who had beaten a friend of mine, a guy named Paul Gilmartin. He used to do, stand up, and he did something called Dinner and a Movie on TBS for quite a few years. But anyway, he had lost. She came in, I beat her, and it was 9:30 at night. So I wrote a set, and I wasn't really thinking, but they said, the next set is 1 week later, and it's at 9:30 in the morning. So the audience was like all kids.
That's not really fair, because there's such a difference, not only in the overall atmosphere, but the audience and the perception of the audience between 9 a.m. and 9 p.m. is horrifically different. And television never did really understand stand-up comedy. I mean, it's much like that initial showcase you did when you were 24, where it's you talking to a restaurant manager and a cook. It's not the ideal situation. Stand-up comedy needs an audience. It needs an audience that's there for comedy, and that kind of understands. And I can't imagine at 9 a.m. that it would work too well. Now, you mentioned Kevin James. You were coming up at kind of the golden years of stand-up. Was there anybody you worked with that became a superstar, or that you looked up to and maybe learned something from? Any mentors?
Well, yeah, the funny thing is the guys I worked with maybe 3 times, and I worked with Stephen Wright once, and I really enjoyed watching him, and it was pretty amazing. The guys that really, there's a guy named Richard Jenny who is, to me, one of the best I've ever seen, and he's no longer with us. In Chicago at that time, Rick Overton and Richard Jenny were like the biggest comics at a club in Chicago called the Funny Firm. And at one point, Chicago downtown had like a Catcher Rising Star, the Funny Firm, which was an amazing kind of privately owned club. It had an improv. It had Zanies, which was its original club, which used to feature Leno and Seinfeld pretty regularly. So in terms of I worked with Bill Hicks, if who is one of the greatest, I think, and he was very committed to what he was doing and very serious. The only guy I know who got featured in the New Yorker. I was very envious of that. But,
and you brought up names that all these guys work for me. Now, I wasn't a comic; I was the producer. But Bill Hicks and Rick Overton and Rich Jenny all work for me, and so I'm very aware of who they are and the type of comedy. There's a lot of different strategies towards humor between those three. But I think you being exposed to those, along with Wright, gave you a lot of a broad spectrum of types of comedy, and hopefully that helped you find who you were on stage.
I did. It's funny, you get I was pretty much who I am off stage, and it's the guy you're talking to right now. There's no great transformation. I wish there could be. But anyway, in general, I'm just speaking in general, but all of them are pretty much who they are. They just exaggerate it or, present, amazing material, and they have many years experience, and one of them is still alive. And I don't know that Rick Overton still, I saw him a couple years ago in an improv thing in San Francisco for, a big thing here where they do about 2 weeks of stand up and all types of comedy. And then they do tributes to comedians and all that. So I did see him at Sketchfest a couple of years ago.
Well, I was just trying to help paint a picture of what you were like as a stand-up comic. We talked about how you got into the business. We talked about how you did your research and wrote a paper on it, and that kind of gave you a educational foundation. But then by working in the clubs in Chicago and getting a chance to hang out with people like Bill Hicks and Rick Overton, gave you, these guys are very experienced, successful headliners, gave you a chance to see that side of it. And I'm thinking that you had the success you had for your 11 years because you were able to learn from all these different angles about the industry.
No, that's very fair. And many more. The guys, to drop more names in terms of the guys who those guys I worked with in Chicago, and that's not a road gig. When you work on the road with certain comics, you really get to,
Oh yeah, when you're
for better or worse, you get to know them better,
when you're stuck in a shitty condo with some comic you don't know, you learn a lot about them.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of that, in your 11 years, were there any really special fun gigs that you consider the best, or did you have a worst road gig situation?
I have it all. No, I mean the best, I think, for me, I will tell you something very weird. 1 week ago, probably know Steve Osborne, but he and I know each other, and he lets people up on Sunday night at the Punchline in San Francisco. And I worked with him a couple weeks ago at a winery, and he said, come by and maybe I can put you up. And I live 10 minutes from the Punchline. I mean, my wife and I bought a house in San Francisco in '93, and it was $185,000, and it's now currently worth almost $200,000. We have upgraded. No, I'm kidding. The deck is a mess. But Steve, for Steve to come to the Punchline is probably 45 minutes from Sebastopol, if I'm not mistaken. I think that's where he lives. I'm pretty sure. But, there's not, I'm just saying that I'm fortunate to have, stable housing in this ridiculous place, this town. So anyway, I went there last week. I got up for 5 minutes. I did great. And it was it was almost like being in a time machine. It was unbelievable because it was the first time I'd been in a club, like a comedy club, in 25 years, probably, because as we will find out, I pursued a degree or a, career in education. But last Sunday night, it was like it was. And it's just the feeling was so amazing. Now, granted, 5 minutes on a Sunday night, and no one worked Monday. It was President's Day. It was packed, but it was just really an amazing feeling. And I've done a lot of gigs since then, but everything is compromised. I'm not trying to, but not in clubs. I'm just saying, not in a comedy club. So a lot of the stuff is, I work at a winery pretty often that does comedy, and it does it very well, but it's not a full-time comedy place, and other restaurants and everything. So it was really amazing. But to get more, in the old days, I had a gig. I opened for Tim Allen at the Marin Civic Center.
Oh, that sounds like fun.
At the peak, I got 20 minutes. I had a coffee waiter for me. I had two people. One guy just got me coffee, and the other one, led me around and got me on stage. But the funny thing is, it was the easiest gig I've ever had. I could say that because, and it's the weird thing about stand-up, you start out in the worst situations, and you wait to get bumped at 1 a.m. in front of 4 people, and you finally, get better and get more comfortable. And once you get good, you don't have to be good because the audience will, in this situation, they would laugh at anything, not at anything. But it was just funny. I just had a blast. I remember that. That was, that was about, I was going to say 1,000 people.
It goes back to what we were talking about. There's so many different situations from a private gig to a winery to a showcase in a restaurant to a full theater that you're opening for Tim Allen. I mean, it's a huge difference when it comes to stand-up comedy. There's two things I wanted to go back on. You've kind of jumped around a little bit. So first off, let's let everybody listening around the world know that you can't get an outhouse in the Bay Area for $200,000. And two, that you did, after 11 years in the business, you did swing away. You became an accredited teacher. You're now currently teaching high school. You're still doing some stand-up comedy, as you've already alluded to, in some private gigs, and you have an upcoming fundraiser with me, which I'm excited about. But let's take it back a little bit. What was it after 11 years that pushed you to switch away and get your credential and start teaching high school?
You want her name?
You're taking names? No, I meant a lot of times it's family, but other times, you just feel like you've gotten as far as you can get in a career and it's time for something different. Or, I don't know, somebody cracked a whip and said you had to be a teacher. I'm just asking, what was your story?
Well, really floppy sexual protection. And no, I'm married to the same woman who took my career away or whatever. It was really a thing where I was, when I moved to San Francisco, I moved in 93. I met my wife to be about 4 months later, and we dated for quite a while, and then a child was produced, and then two more, and But it was really kind of a thing with me and stand up. It was getting hard. It meant like I had to make some decisions about going to LA, and I didn't want to go to LA, and that's kind of one of the big flaws in my life plan. If I want to do stand up, you kind of have to want to go to LA or New York. I mean, maybe people have defied that, and
No, but that's a truism. If you're really going for the career, you got to be where the big jobs are. How did you pick teaching high school? That's a tough gig. Were you always you got accredited, so you had to have the education and the careers, the diplomas to do that. Was that something that you were looking forward to doing, or you felt you'd be good at?
No, I don't mean to be. I hate to sound, but I mean, it was like, I got to find a job because I had, in 95, my first daughter was born. And then in 97, my twin girls were born. And then in 2000, my son was born, all with the same wife. And we, and the thing was, my wife is a stay-at-work mom. That's what I think, because she has 4 jobs right now, and she's supposed to retire, and it's kind of a myth, I think. But she's kind of a workaholic. So in order to survive, I couldn't do stand-up and stay and really be with my kids and help raise them and everything. I had to make a choice. And the whole thing about education, I did like it. I'm not trying to say, but I did not go to college to be a teacher. And I've learned so much, and I have a completely different view of it from, before I started doing it.
Right.
But, for me, it was a kind of a thing where I looked at different schools. I thought, okay, teaching, it aligns with my kids' lives. That's one thing.
Right. When you're off, they're off, vice versa. Stuff they're interested to. Now, did you find, and this is a question that I've been waiting to ask you, so it's the important one. When you went into teaching, and you teach high school, which is not the easiest, did you find that your experience in comedy and in the communication skills you developed as a comic, did that help you with the kids?
It really did. Yes, it absolutely did. In fact, it's invaluable. I mean, I went into a program at State that was called Project Include, that gave you a general education credential and a special education credential. So it was a 2-year, actually a year and a half, or I think it was 2 years, 2-year program. And you looked at education from different perspectives. And I ended up, of course, everyone in my class that went through that program all ended up getting hired in special education, because that's where the jobs were, like, an overload. So I dealt with a lot of kids with behavior issues, kids where you needed to have patience and thick skin and you could be armed. I mean, that wouldn't hurt. But so but so I'm just saying, absolutely. There are certain things I haven't ever done this on stage, and I have sometimes you get into a comic mode when you're in front of a class, so that the kids who are interrupting you become hecklers in your mind. And it really is a funny thing, especially now when I'm in front of a class. I need silence. That used to be the standard, but kind of post-pandemic or whatever, kids are really comfortable talking to each other when you're trying to talk. And I say that as someone who co-teaches in a classroom. In my own class, it's not allowed, but in other classes, teachers kind of work with it. They're just basically nicer. And I'm from like an old Gestapo world or something. I don't know. So,
well, I would call it disciplinary, situation. Yeah. And I think kids need guidelines. I think they need those rails to know what's allowed in society and what isn't. And so the more liberal teachers that kind of have that, going back to my generations, that hippie kind of anything goes is different than the more militaristic, hey, I'm going to set boundaries and you're not going to like it, but it's going to help you when you leave school. I'm more lean that way. The fact that you also got your education dealing with special needs kids is really impressive, by the way. I think it's, first off, unsung heroes or teachers. Let's hear it for them.
Thank you.
And dealing with special needs kids is even extra effort. As you said, you need the patience, you need the control. And the fact that you're able to do all that, Ian, is really special. And I'm sure the fact that you have 3 girls and a son help you not only with the kids at work, but dealing with the kids at work probably make you a better father, I would guess. And all this comes together as I'm trying to wrap this up for us. Is that you learned a lot, both through research and actual stage time for over a decade in comedy. In the last couple decades, you've been able to use those skills and help, teach high schoolers, help deal with special needs kids, be a great father and raise 4 of your own. I mean, it did all kind of work out, right?
So far, it's everything day to day.
No one's in prison, right?
No, I mean, I'm close, but no, it's no one's in prison. Health is good. Yeah, I know what you're saying, and I do. At one time I did want my son to win the Stanley Cup. I had that all laid out, but we didn't. We're going to have to move to Canada, and there's a lot. So that didn't happen, but he is happy what he's doing.
Well, it's, you and I aren't friends. We're going to be working together soon, but I wanted to get to know you and finding out about your foundation in stand-up comedy and where you took your personal career with or without the support of your wife, getting into fatherhood and then teaching. I think it sounds like an amazing career. But for my audience, which is here for the comedy, it's important to understand that the stand-up comedy, as difficult as it is, does teach you skills that can be bent and twisted to help you in other areas. And I am sure from other people I've spoken with and getting to know you, that having a foundation in stand-up comedy was certainly an asset as you moved into teaching. Now, I know that you're not doing regular gigs. You're doing fundraisers in restaurants and wineries. In fact, as I mentioned, you're doing a gig for me soon. These days, do you see yourself continuing spot hitting comedy, or would you like to get back into the clubs, or is that kind of done and you moved on and you're just playing with it because you enjoy it?
No, I mean, I'm, retiring in June.
Hey, and, wait a minute. Yay. Congratulations. That's awesome.
My students could not be happier.
You got support.
No, but so then it's a really funny thing because, and the scary thing is that kind of punchline experience. I don't want to say I don't belong to the clubs, but the clubs are definitely for a younger perspective. I was, when I was doing stand-up, Tom Dreesen was kind of the older guy who would come by and people would kind of, it's Tom Dreesen,
right.
He's older. and that's what I've become. But the club situation, I mean, this particular club is a lot of fun. So I want to keep doing it, but I do know that I got to figure out how to do it really regularly.
Get your chops back. But also, I understand being an older producer, I would love to reopen, my wife has threatened to leave me if I do, but reopen a comedy club or something. But she often reminds me that as much as I enjoy being on stage, it's a different lifestyle, it's a different audience, and it's a different era than what you and I worked in back in the 80s. And that doesn't mean it's bad or good. It's just different from our experiences. However, as a producer, I do several fundraisers. I like going and helping places like wineries and stuff, producing a show. And I would recommend or assume that in your place in your career, you'll be able to keep your toes in the water and get on stage here and there and keep that joy of stand-up in your life without letting that, ruin the career and the fatherhood and the husbandry that you've built.
Well, I don't know. It's kind of exciting to maybe run off with somebody and have a 2-week binge. And
ladies and gentlemen, his wife is not listening.
The number one thing is when I was 30 years ago or 35 years ago, whatever. I was like on a clock, like a woman's biological clock, and like a career clock. And I was kind of like, okay, I've been on Star Search. Now I got, this, and you can see whether it's working or it's not, but it's so stressful. Now, if I will appear on any street corner kind of thing. I'm not fussy or picky. I just enjoy being able to do stand up, and so that's kind of where I'm coming from.
Well, that's awesome. And I, as a producer, am excited that you've stuck with it. I've seen your tapes. I know you're funny. You're going to be doing a set for me at a fundraiser coming up in a few months. And I just wanted to get you on the podcast and let you tell your story because I think it's interesting. I've had a chance to interview comics that their whole life has been in comedy and its challenges and ups and downs, especially when you get married and have families. And I know several comics like you that had to shift off, and some stayed in the industry, some went into teaching or some other industry. They loved stand-up. It was a good part of their youth, but they've had to move on so that they could support a family and have that lay down some roots that you can't really do as a road comic. But Ian, looking forward to working with you soon. Thank you so much for being on the podcast and sharing your story. If somebody wanted to hire you for a winery gig or something, is there a way to find you?
My high school principal is my agent. And I'm not kidding. That's almost
just hilarious.
But I'm in the book. I'm on Facebook. I know, this is kind of why I'm making in terms of my own promotional. So yes, I would just say, Facebook, Ian Williams.
Well, ladies, that's okay, Ian. No pressure. Ladies and gentlemen, if you're looking for some stand-up comedy entertainment that's fun and clean in the San Francisco Bay Area, his name's Ian Williams. And if you need some tutoring or some education, he's a terrific high school teacher and special ed teacher, and we're very proud of him for that. And he's an amazing father of 3 daughters and a son. Congratulations on all your successes, Ian, and thanks for being on the podcast.
Thank you so much, Scott. You could be my life coach or some. Anyway, no, I appreciate it. You're very you're very kind, and I had a great time.
Great. Thanks so much for being on. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be back next week with some great stand-up comedy. Thanks for joining us on the podcast. We'll see you soon. Bye.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Stand-Up Comedy, your host and MC. For information on the show, merchandise, and our sponsors, or to send comments to Scott, visit our website at www.standupyourhostandmc.com. Look for more episodes soon and enjoy the world of stand-up comedy. Visit a comedy showroom near you.